Hey guys, hello. How's it going? I told you I was going to be doing a live today. This is day 6, and I am trying to invite um, Marshall here. So bear with me, and I'm going to do a little interview with him. And he's a really awesome guy, so you're going to like this. How are you guys doing? Hi, Bart. Hi, Tom. How's it going? It is beautiful here in the mountains, that's for sure. I'm going to be my personal life coach and mentor, Marshall Bircher, and we were to
There
do
we
this
go.
in the group. Here he is. Hi.
Hi, guys. Okay.
There he is. We were trying to
Ah,
do this in the group, but I've never done a live with somebody else before, and I have kind of spotty internet here, and it just wasn't working out in the group. So we're going to go ahead and do it here on my page and post it in the group afterwards. So this is Marshall.
yeah. Plus, I've linked it to the group so you can actually approve it. It'll show up
Oh,
there.
nice.
So,
Uh-oh.
yeah. So, hi.
Okay. Yeah, and we are both on our phones. So let me just jump right in. Is that cool? I
Yeah,
am
go for it.
going
Hi,
to
Lori.
start off. Hey guys. So I'm going to start off here just sharing very briefly. This is going to be very brief. What brought me together with Marshall and how we started working together. It's a very long, heavy story. So I'm just going to touch on a few things here. Um, when I first connected with Marshall, we actually connected through a mutual friend here on Facebook who was kind of who I shared a similar story with. And I was watching him for a while. I was watching him interact with other people. I noticed there was something really different about him and really unique. And I just watched him for quite a few months to see how he interacted with others, to see how he handled being challenged by other people. And my little backstory here, briefly, I come out of a very traumatic situation. I lost my mother, my adopted mother, when I was 12, just shy of my 13th birthday. And after that, long story short, I was thrown out onto the streets of Los Angeles, of Hollywood, and where I became a victim of sex trade and trafficking from the ages of altogether 13 to 18. I said 15 to 18 the other day, but that was wrong. It was 13. So I come from a background of severe sexual abuse and trauma. I had been through years and years of therapy. I had tried everything known, thousands of dollars. And there was something that jumped out about Marshall that I knew I had to connect with him. So I worked with him through a few of his closure technique sessions, and then I asked him if he would mentor me, and he did. So uh, overcame a lot of that trauma, and that's my abbreviated story, which we'll get into another time. But just to kind of set the stage here, what a hot mess I was when I came to him. And so, without further ado, Marshall, I'm going to hand it over to you. Maybe start by sharing how you got into doing the work that you do now and what your background
hmm
is and a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So you can hear me clearly? Come across clearly here?
Yep,
All right, good.
yep.
So I actually got into the work because of my own trauma, because I had dealt with a similar frame of abandonment with my mother passing away when I was a kid. I was 10 when she died of brain cancer. And there was a systemic form of abuse called narcissistic abuse that entered my life at that point because my father was very inattentive to the well-being of his kids and married an unhealthy woman who became my stepmother and put us through hell. And that actually resulted in a lot of internal shame. And then with the culture I grew up in, I'd internalized a lot of self-hate. And by the time I'd reached the age of 19, I'd attempted suicide 4 times. And I was pretty much committed towards exiting this world. And then I kind of numbed out. And I got married, and I had a son, and I had a daughter, and I started to notice that I wanted out. I wanted out of the stress. I wanted out of the depression. I wanted out of the emotional flashbacks, the chronic anxiety, the panic attacks. But therapy wasn't working. Reading a billion different self-help books wasn't working. Coping wasn't working. Doing all the little coping things that I had learned in therapy, I was done. I was tired. And so I actually went out and I enrolled in a program called the Super Achiever Coaching Program. And it started teaching me a way to restructure the way how I thought about my pain. But I kept hitting these massive walls, especially with shame. And I was very lost as to who I was, and I didn't even know it. And so I reached out to the creator of the group, and he connected me with a man named Robert Wu Duan, who is a practicing shaman out of Aspen, Colorado. And that's where I got my start, because he took me through some shamanically created techniques that helped me start releasing my own trauma. And then I started practicing it on others under his tutelage. I became his apprentice, and then I started seeing people have really consistent results. And that's when I started formalizing the process into what I call the closure technique now. And I've used that both with myself to resolve my own abandonment trauma, my own sexual abuse trauma. Identity trauma is another thing that happens, especially in highly controlled systems. You're going to be abused in your identity, told who you are. And so that's what got me into it. And I started noticing people had the same kind of issues I was dealing with, so I started asking for guinea pigs and volunteers, and they started having the same results, and they had them very consistently. And so I turned it into a practice, which now I've been doing now just over 11 years. And I've worked with people all over the world with all sorts of trauma. And specifically, I specialize in trauma clearing and codependent recovery. So yeah, that's how I got into it. I'm a survivor myself. I do what I preach. My tools are created from my experience and the experience of my clients. And I do what works. Results are all that matter to me in that respect. So yeah.
Could you explain to people what exactly a shaman is? Because I think there's a misunderstanding there. You know, we think of people like, you know, out in the jungle with headdresses on and,
Yeah.
you know.
And that, yeah. Shaman's a title that's awarded to an individual who has a highly specialized ability in something. So it would not necessarily be a healer. It doesn't have to be that. It could be a boat maker. It could be a singer. It could be someone who creates something or treats something. So, and the concept of shamanism actually rooted, hi son, my son's on, hi Truman, is rooted back in the Siberian histories. And then also Native Americans have their medicine man and things like that, which would be considered shamanic. So you can have it applied to a number of different things, but generally it's someone who specializes in creating change in something. So, yeah.
Awesome. So, I mean, you've been doing this how long?
11 years.
How long have you been working with people on this closure technique?
And the technique, 11 years, yeah. I actually started, that was one of the first things I trained in. At that time, I called it the white space clearing process.
Okay, yeah.
But I changed it and formalized it into what is called the technique now.
Oh, yeah. Okay, now what really stood out to me with this technique, because I've been through it all, Marshall, as you know. And you know, I don't discredit anyone else's techniques or their methodologies at all. But what really sold me, if you will, on this method was it was instant. While there were certain thoughts that I had to continue working on changing and new behavior patterns that I had to really focus on changing, the technique itself and the intensity of the triggers. And I was diagnosed with PTSD, by the way. Anybody that's been following me so far this month, or you've heard me say this a bazillion times, and I don't like to own this. This is not something that I want to like own. This is my PTSD. I'm just trying to give you reference here. PTSD is supposedly incurable. You're going to live with it. You're going to die with it. And what blew my mind about this technique was just how quickly these triggers and these the trauma associated with these memories and these triggers, it was pretty much instant.
Yep.
So could you talk a little bit about that and maybe a little bit how
Mm-hmm.
this works for
Why it
people
works that way?
yeah.
Yeah. But see, the technique is rooted in the concept that trauma only happens because we didn't get a need met after the event. Okay. So when we go through trauma, what happens is our nervous system becomes overloaded and we freeze. We contract, become compressed. And we freeze because we need to play dead, because that's what the brain determines it can do in order to survive the perceived or real threat that's happening. Okay. So what we do is we help the nervous system calm itself down so it's open to feeling again. So that's what's called a thaw. And then we get into the sensations of the event and we ask the aspect of self, the part that's going through the trauma over and over and over, what it needs. And generally what it needs is it needs to feel safe, and then it needs a secondary action. Usually that's an action that's either going to fight for itself or it's going to leave the situation. And then we give it what it needs. And what that does is it creates a different emotional association in the body and brain with the event. So it doesn't erase the event, but what it does is it changes your emotional response to it. So rather than feeling terror towards the event, which is what the trauma freeze created for you, you'll feel indifference or calm or peace.
Yeah.
Generally, the biggest result consistently is indifference. You just don't care that it happened anymore. And then we transition that aspect of self to a new want. We give it a new path so it can go play and do whatever it needs to do. And that creates the closure that results in the indifference, that the lack of, the memory comes up, but it doesn't terrorize me anymore. I don't feel frozen or panicked anymore. So yeah, that's why it works the way it does. We're creating a new emotional association with it.
Absolutely. And, you know, I wrote you the other day, and, you know, one big issue and traumatic event for me was the death of my mother. You know, I was right by her side when she died, a horrible death, you know, with cancer. And that held me back for years. I was scared of death, and I was just lived in a very fearful space. And now I'm working with hospice.
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
just like, that's mind blowing. It's like, not only have I become indifferent to this particular event, well, not indifferent in the sense that, you know, it doesn't evoke any emotion because it was my mother, you know, but it's
Right.
beyond indifferent. It's like, this is now my passion.
Yep.
And, you know, that's mind blowing.
It is. It's transformative because you found your freedom to choose something different. That's really the goal there. So, I mean, if you've been traumatized sexually, if you've been traumatized in a relationship or with love or with being who you are, now you can come back to that and go, oh, I don't have those feelings anymore, so I can choose a different reality for myself. And it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to do that, because you don't have to fight against the anxiety or the fear. You don't have to waste your energy in it anymore. It's just like, oh, there it is. I choose that, and you go with it because you're thinking and acting differently because you don't have all that trauma energy in the way. So yeah, that's a common result. That's what people end up doing. So
yeah, I mean,
and it
it
lasts.
keeps
I mean,
it does. It does. So the biggest challenge for me, and I won't even say it's a challenge, I would say it's kind of a relearning. And you just touched on that a little bit a moment ago about, okay, so the trauma is gone, the intensity of that past trauma is gone. Now, can you share a little bit about the how we reorganize our thoughts or how we implement these new
Mhm.
thought patterns. And because it's almost like we're learning like children. All, nobody ever
Yeah.
taught us this stuff. We're learning these healthy thoughts. Can you
Yep.
touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, totally. Because when we part of the trick with trauma is that we incorporate it as part of our identity, and we
Hmm.
incorporate it part of our worldview. This is the way the world is. This is the way this thing is. So I've got to discover what's new about it. So I eliminate the trauma. Then we have to go into an exploratory process where we use questions to discover what's light and expansive for us post closure. That way we start
Right.
understanding who we are organically. That's the
Hmm.
key, because a lot of times in trauma we also have a co-association with either codependency or some
Hmm.
other coping component there, and we're using that to shape who we are. We've got to discover who we are without the trauma, without the codependent coping, without those other survival mechanisms. And so we do that through experiments to understand what matters to us, because that's the big goal. What's important to me? What brings me expansion? What brings me joy? What makes me happy? And that
Right.
process it's a very simple process, but it's one you have to be persistent in. So
Hmm.
I do that with clients post closure using what I call the brilliance of you principles. And that
Hmm.
allows them to reshape their mindset and then their action towards their life and start get the results they want. So, yeah,
Hmm.
boom, boom.
So does anybody have any questions here for Marshall? His technique, the closure technique, or anything around trauma for that matter?
Yeah, we'll see. I know most of the people on. It's my son and
Yeah, I
Connie and
recognize them.
Jackie and Jenny.
And, yep, and Josh
Let's
and
see.
Kelly. Those are my people.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Good old Facebook.
Yeah, yeah, the Book of Faces.
So
So,
yeah, if you want guidance or info on it, what you can do is you can go to my website, which is www.freetheself.com, and then you can reach out and contact me there. I also have a 6-week course that starts here June 3rd called Get Closure Now, and you can go to closure.freetheself.com and apply for the spot there. I have 20 spots. There's 16 available. And that's where I'm actually going to train you how to regulate your nervous system so you can get control of your
mm,
anxiety, get control of
hmm.
your triggers and your panic, and actually start to incorporate calm into your normal daily life. Then I'll teach you what the process is, the closure technique, and then I'll teach you how to regulate post technique so you can get more of what you want in your life all in 6 weeks. And then you also get a one-on-one experience with me in it. That's why there's a maximum of 20 people. So we can take you through the technique and get closure for yourself on any trauma you're dealing with. So
Hmm.
jump in on that because
And it
those seats
really
will go
works.
quick. They're already filling up. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's got a
I'm not getting
92%
anything. Well,
success rate. So
yeah, I just have to make it clear that I am not getting any kind of a kickback here. My intent here is to help other people because this has changed my life, this technique. And really those who know me like know that this is my heart, like for healing for people. And I mean this has been so effective. When I first connected with Marshall and started working with him, a lot of people don't know this, but I could not really even leave my house. Things had gotten so bad um, that I could barely leave the house, and I know I needed help. And I mean, in such a
yeah,
short amount of time, everything just turned around so quickly that I felt like for Mental Health Awareness Month, this was really an important conversation to have. And
yeah,
for anybody that's looking, because I have a lot of people come to me and ask me, how I overcame various traumas, and it's really hard to just explain in a nutshell. And so, I thought this might
yeah.
help.
It's a
Is
little
there?
tricky.
How does?
Yeah, it
Here's a
should. I
question.
got a
How does
question
this?
from one.
Oh,
Yeah, how
do
does
you?
this help
Okay.
when anger is difficult to navigate? Yeah, it's
Mm,
from Lauren. He's a friend of mine. Lauren, Uh, well, if you don't have the anger, then you don't have to navigate it, because anger is a response to the violation of either a boundary or an unmet need. So the anger is like, hey, I need attention. Let's get this need met. Well, what it does is if you don't have a trauma trigger anymore, then the fight or flight doesn't kick in. That's the kick. So that's why the triggers go away, because you don't have an emotional association with an event that tells your brain that you're going to be threatened. So if X equals I'm threatened and we change that to X equals I'm indifferent, then you don't get triggered anymore. So the anger doesn't have to be there anymore, and you're just getting your need met. And so when the trigger or an event that would have triggered you in the past shows up, you're going to be like, eh. I had one client who had a pretty strong emotional association with particular songs from the 80s. And after we did the technique with her, that no longer, those songs are pretty common on the radio. And she contacted me and she's all like, I just heard the song and I don't even care, because the association's been neutralized. She also had a real panic with sleep, with dark rooms, because of traumas that had happened in those kinds of environments, and now she sleeps. So the only reason you have fight and flight kick in is because your brain has an association that says, I'm threatened when this happens. And that's usually because of a past trauma. So we eliminate that association by creating a different one, then you won't have that trigger point anymore.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to cut in here for a minute because a few days ago I had something that happened to me, and I felt like a little mini trigger. And this is something that I'm really putting you on the spot here. This is something that you and I had dealt with. And I was really surprised at the reaction I was feeling from this, because I'm like, wait a minute, where's this coming from? But I was able to like catch myself. Like I didn't become lost in the trigger, if that makes sense. Where, Lauren, you know how like sometimes when you're in that place, it almost feels like you're in a fun house and everything becomes distorted and everything looks misshapen and you're just wigging out, right? Like that doesn't happen anymore. Like that didn't happen, Marshall. It was more like it was just momentary, but I was able to regulate my emotions and my thoughts and bring myself back to center within a few hours. But it was kind of like a discipline because I had to really choose my thoughts. Like I had a little inkling of that feeling, and I could have jumped right in with the thoughts and reproduce that whole trigger situation again, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I
it's
don't want
because
people
your
to think like
neurology
this is
likes it.
all, yeah. So, but that was
It's because,
actually empowering. But that was actually,
yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, because it's like, I didn't need to call you. I didn't need to call anybody else. Like, I got my shit together. Sorry. But I did, I was like,
Yep.
no, you got this, girl, and I did. So that even in itself, Lauren, is empowering, knowing that, even if you get emotional, you could bring yourself
Yeah.
back to center.
Yeah. This doesn't eliminate emotions, because you're going to have reactions to things that are exciting or disappointing. What it does is it eliminates the association, so you don't go into a cascade where you become paralyzed again. And you do have to practice some things neurologically, because your brain's already wired for a particular response. And neurological responses are like water. They go with the path of least resistance. So we eliminate this association, but that doesn't mean there's other things that we need to be aware of. And that's why we want to regulate and be attentive to new practices, new mindsets, so that we create new associations that reinforce the shift towards peace or indifference for you. So, yeah, what you're doing there is pretty normal. And I've
Yeah, and
experienced
it's
that
so
myself.
important. Yeah. What was that? What was that last
I've
thing you
experienced
said?
that myself.
Yeah, and the thing is that like this really reared its ugly head before I had closure in this area, especially in the context of romantic relationships, because I was getting triggered and I would just spiral. And it was like, go away, come back, go away, come back. That's what I was putting out there.
Yeah.
And now I have had a few opportunities for, romantic relationships, which they didn't work out for one reason or another, which is fine. But I didn't get into that place of like assigning meaning to the thoughts
Right.
and to the actions of the other person. It was like I was able to regulate myself and my own emotions, and it wasn't about this other person. So it's really
Yep.
quite amazing.
There you go. Yep. Yeah, that's the key. You're no longer absorbing and creating significance in the event. You're willing to receive the event and move forward. So there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, because I think a big part of the problem is that we assign meaning to these thoughts
Mm-hmm.
that we
We
have that
do.
are normal thoughts, but because of our old distorted thinking, which is really habit at this point, we assign meaning and we build on that and create these scenarios that we set ourselves up for reliving the trauma because of our thinking, even
Yeah.
if the trigger's not there anymore. So that's really fascinating to me. um, and again, it's a discipline, and I myself have been telling people that a lot lately. Like, it's not like these thoughts are just going to go away. I mean, this is years of patterned thinking here, right? I
Yep.
mean,
Yeah. It's going to take a little work on our part, but the beauty is because we don't have the trauma in the way, we can choose what we want it to be.
yeah, that's
And then
awesome.
it's a lot easier. It's considerably easier. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's the key. So you don't have to suffer with the nightmares. You don't. I mean, people panic going out their door. You don't have to do that anymore. You can
yeah,
go out and live your life. Go do the exciting things you want to do. Stop living in the fear or coping with it. That's what most people do with trauma or with codependency or
mhm.
pain, is they're coping. We're taught to cope. We're gonna have
Exhausting.
to live with it. And I think that's, to be crass, that's bullshit. And so you can
Yeah,
get free. You just have to have the right tools done in the right way. Then you go on with your life and do the brilliant things you are here to do. So
yeah.
there you go.
Does anybody else have any questions for Marshall? You got them now. Take advantage of it.
Let's see. And you're welcome, Lauren. You're welcome. He's saying thank
Yeah,
you
it
there.
is our pleasure.
So, Danny.
Our pleasure. Nope, no questions.
Okay. No, we're good. Okay. Well, thank you for having me here. And let's
Yeah,
do more of these. We can talk about specific elements of whatever, whether it's trauma or codependency, relationships, things like that. Mindset, that came up a fair bit tonight. So that works for me.
awesome. So if you guys have, for our next live with Marshall, if you have any questions that you can think of, you can just shoot them over to me, and I'll save them for our next series, because I really want this to help you guys. This is really for you guys, I want to bring this to you. And so just, message it to me, and we'll talk about it, guys. You're welcome, Sarah. I interrupt myself all the time, Marshall. You know that.
Oh, you're good. Yep.
Marshall and I are like Pinky and the Brain. Can you guess who Pinky is and who the Brain is?
All right, right. We're both brains. We're very, very smart one. Don't discredit that.
No, I
Okay.
know. Hey, Pinky's pretty cool. Don't,
Yeah.
you can't be
No, he is.
dissing Pinky.
He's creative. Nope. You gotta have both. Gotta have both.
All
Okay.
right, guys, if you don't have any questions, then we're gonna end this. And love you guys bunches. I'm so glad that you were part of this. And till next time. Bye,
Okay.
guys.
You guys
Thanks.
have a good night. Have fun. Bye bye.